If your mind never slows down, it's not because you didn't sleep enough. It's because no one is in charge. Thoughts race without warning. Worries loop endlessly. Negative scenarios appear out of nowhere and drain your energy before anything even happens. You try to relax. You try to distract yourself. But your mind stays alert, as if something is always about to go wrong. The Stoics had a simple name for this: a mind without governance. And a mind like that rarely knows peace, even when everything looks calm on the outside. Stoicism was born in times of real crisis: war, exile, loss, constant instability. And yet, these thinkers spoke about calm, clarity, and emotional control as something possible, trainable, and accessible. For anyone willing to organize their inner world, Stoicism never promised external comfort. It taught internal order. The problem isn't feeling emotions. That's part of being human. The problem begins when every thought becomes an order, every fear becomes a certainty, and every worry takes up more space than it deserves. The mind doesn't get tired from too many problems. It gets tired from having no filter. In this video, you'll hear 6 Stoic principles, direct, practical, and timeless, that were used when the world was already out of control. These aren't motivational quotes to save. They're mental tools for difficult times. And before we continue, let me ask you something. What do you think is the biggest challenge to keeping a calm mind today? Too much information? Lack of silence? Anxiety? Fear of the future? Tell me in the comments. Stay until the end. Some of these ideas may change how you relate to your own thoughts. Lesson 1. What happens does not define your mind. Your response does. When the mind loses calm, the reason is usually the same. It tries to take responsibility for things that aren't under its control. It wants to solve everything, predict everything, control everything. The result isn't efficiency, it's exhaustion. Stoicism begins with a simple distinction that changes everything. Some things depend on you, others don't. When that line becomes blurred, the mind overloads. You react to people. You react to outcomes. You react to expectations. You even react to things that haven't happened yet. At the end of the day, the exhaustion doesn't come from what you did. It comes from what you tried to control unnecessarily. The mind creates mental versions of events. A mistake becomes an identity. A silence becomes a threat. An event becomes a judgment. These aren't facts. They're interpretations. And once they take control, the mind stops responding to reality and starts responding to its own stories. Stoicism doesn't teach emotional coldness. It teaches clarity. Not every situation demands immediate emotional involvement. Some require action. Others require understanding. When everything carries the same weight, the mind collapses. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" the Stoic question becomes, "What part of this is actually under my control?" That single shift reduces internal noise. With time, the mind stops fighting what it can't change, and calm begins to appear. Not because life got easier, but because the inner struggle ended. Lesson 2. Not every thought deserves your attention. One of the biggest mental mistakes today is believing that every thought has value. A thought appears, and immediately you feel the need to analyze it, solve it, or worry about it. But the mind isn't an objective judge. It produces thoughts constantly, many of them repetitive, distorted, or useless. For the Stoics, thinking didn't mean agreeing. A thought can appear without permission, but it doesn't need to stay. Anxiety often begins when a thought enters the mind and is treated as truth. What if this goes wrong? This won't work. This will be a problem. Nothing has happened yet. Your body reacts, your mood shifts, and your focus disappears. Marcus Aurelius wrote about observing thoughts without becoming entangled in them. The problem isn't thoughts themselves, it's identification with them. Stoicism doesn't teach you to fight your thoughts. It teaches you not to follow them automatically. When you stop feeding every thought with emotion, something interesting happens. The mind slows down on its own. Some thoughts fade, others lose intensity, not because you fought them, but because you stopped giving them power. Calm begins when the mind becomes a place of observation, not a battlefield. Lesson 3. The mind gets more exhausted from the future than from the present. Most mental fatigue doesn't come from what's happening now. It comes from mentally living in what hasn't happened yet. The mind jumps ahead, creates scenarios, imagines losses, rehearses conversations that may never happen. By the time action is needed, you're already exhausted. The Stoics understood this clearly. We suffer more from imagination than from reality. The present, even when difficult, is usually simpler than the version the mind creates. Planning is necessary. Living mentally in the future is not. When the mind abandons the present, it loses the only place where action is possible. And without action, all that remains is anxiety. Ask yourself this instead: what can be done right now? Sometimes the answer is nothing, and accepting that is also a form of control. When the mind stays anchored in the present, it begins to rest. Not because problems disappear, but because they stop being duplicated by imagination. Lesson 4. The mind calms down when it knows where responsibility ends. Much mental agitation comes from trying to manage what isn't yours to manage. Other people's reactions, outcomes, recognition, approval. Epictetus taught that freedom begins when you clearly separate what's under your control from what isn't. You can act with integrity. You can prepare. You can choose your effort. But you can't control results. When the mind accepts this boundary, it stops wasting energy on the impossible. Thoughts become more focused. Reactions become fewer. Clarity increases. A calm mind isn't one that controls everything. It's one that knows exactly what it's responsible for. Lesson 5. The mind doesn't need to comment on everything. A delay becomes judgment. A mistake becomes self-criticism. A word becomes over-analysis. The internal commentary never stops, and neither does the tension. Marcus Aurelius warned that suffering increases when we add unnecessary opinions to facts. A fact is just a fact. The weight comes from the story added to it. When the mind stops narrating everything, it becomes lighter. If action is needed, act. If not, move on. Silence isn't emptiness, it's mental efficiency. Clarity comes from simplicity, not from constant thinking. Lesson 6. Emotion is a signal, not a command. One of the biggest causes of mental chaos is confusing feeling with action. Anger appears, and you react. Fear appears, and you retreat. Anxiety appears, and the mind scatters. The Stoics didn't reject emotions, but they didn't obey them either. Emotions inform. They don't decide. Creating a pause between feeling and responding changes everything. That pause gives control back to the mind. Over time, emotions lose intensity, not because they're suppressed, but because they're no longer driving decisions. Self-control isn't repression, it's direction. Calming the mind isn't about escaping problems or controlling the world. Stoicism teaches that peace comes from internal order, not perfect circumstances. When you choose your thoughts more carefully, reduce unnecessary commentary, and stop reacting automatically, the mind begins to stabilize, not overnight, but from the inside out. If this video helped you, leave a like and subscribe. It helps the channel continue bringing practical reflections like this. And if you stayed until the end, comment below where you're watching from and whether this topic resonated with you. See you in the next video.